Hello everyone, this is Gwydion, and today I'm going to do something different, and this video may be long, but I've really become a bit obsessed with a game called The Darkest House from Monte Games. It's been out for a while now. It was kickstarted back in the fall of 2021. I went all in and did the entire pledge, which included The Darkest House itself and also some optional additional rooms called the Devoured Halls. So before I even get into what I'm going to cover today, I just want to say up front, there will be a lot of spoilers in here. This is more intended to hopefully fill a gap that I've felt with the game since it's come out. I haven't found a lot of videos other than a few really good ones from Monte Cook himself and a few others that describe a bit about the house, but I feel like there's not a lot of background info, which is intentional for players. I don't think you want to spoil much. But for GMs, I feel like they don't really know what it's about. And I'm wondering if that's precluding folks from actually getting into the Darkest House, just not having any idea what it is. So from here on out, if you don't want to have any spoilers, please leave. Please look at other resources. I don't want to spoil anything for anyone. But again, I'm going to be diving into the secrets of the Darkest House and flipping through pages and explaining more about the house. So without further ado, we're gonna dive in. So consider yourself fully warned. So I'm gonna start with reading. I don't know how well this will come up, but I actually have a hard copy of the book. Yeah, it's gonna be a little hard to read because of the virtual background I have, but rest assured I'm holding up the book and I'm going to read just a little bit of the back to give you a flavor for what is the Darkest House. What it says is a descent into horror for the game you're playing right now. The house on the outskirts of town, sitting empty behind a crumbling wall. The one people whisper about, the one that has gone unlived in for years. Sometimes a few hardy souls creep in, it is said, to see what treasures or secrets they can find. Most find nothing. Just an empty old house. Some return shaken. A few don't return at all. You've seen this house before, if not in this city, then in some other. You've heard the rumors, and if not, well, someday they'll find you. What happens to a house when it sits alone for so many long years? What jealousies and hatreds does it quietly nurture? What whispers echo through its empty hallways? What waits, crouched within its dark rooms, hungering for the return of life? For you? The Darkest House will chill and frighten your players like no other RPG experience. But along the way, their characters will face unique challenges that make them stronger, deeper, richer, and more powerfully bonded as a party. It integrates into your campaign regardless of the setting or game system, as a recurring element or a single mega adventure, developing and enriching characters and your party along the way. So that's something I want to get across in the front end. This game can be used and is intended to be used if you have an ongoing campaign for anything. Shadow of the Demon Lord, D&D 5e, Pathfinder, Cypher System, Vampire the Masquerade, I suppose, anything. And you can mix and match. If you have players that are in different systems that you want to bring into the Darkest House, there are ways, and there's simple ways, and it's a very basic conversion system. And I think that confused some folks as part of the Kickstarter and maybe turned some people off. They thought there'd be a much more very explicit conversion system, but it's really simple. And I will tell you up front, and I might do a series of these videos if they get some views and people are interested, but there's some virtual tabletops that I think are really shine for the Darkest House. And many of you know I'm a big Fantasy Grounds Unity proponent, but I think for a game like the Darkest House, there's some newer VTTs that are much more about the visuals. And I'm thinking of Roll VTT, Alchemy RPG. And they bring the cameras and the images front and center. I've done a few videos already on those that I'll link to. But anyway, let's dive in. And I'm going to show you. Actually, you know what? I'm going to start with the app. So this is a screenshot from the actual app you would use to run the game. And I'm not going to go through this. The intention for this video is more, what is the house about? How do you use it? How do you convert characters? So I'm going to go into all of that. And then I might do a more of a walkthrough on the app itself. Now, most people will have just the darkest house. The Devoured Halls was part of the Kickstarter only and includes some expanded rules. But you can see that it's really cool. I'll show one room just to give you a flavor, and then we'll dive into what I want to cover today. So if you go into the app, you'll typically see an image that is more of a map version. You can copy the links, you can download it, share it with players, do whatever you want. And there's also an image that's typically intended to share with your players. So you click on this, and again, put it in your virtual VTT, share it on Discord, Zoom, whatever, and give the players a feel for what the room looks like. Then you can click around and you have your own overviews here. So, if you're in the room, you have a little description of what the room is about and then some more flavor text. And if players kind of walk around and they go to the closet, you can click on all of these links and it pulls up more information for you as the GM to run. So that's as far as I'm going to go with this for now. But what I want to get into, if you go back to the index here, there are a number of handouts and links that are really important. What I'm going to go through today is the secrets of the house and a bit about the system reference guide. So let's dive in, and I will open up, put this in presentation mode. So this is 120 some odd pages. So let's see how far we get and how much time it takes. But I'm going to try to go through most of it. And I won't flip page by page. I'll talk to most pages. I'm not going to read everything, but I thought this is a pretty cool entree into the house. Secrets of the house. The house invites you in. The house hates you. It's a very big theme. The house wishes to be left alone. The house is lonely. You can already get a sense for the paradoxes in the house. The house is in pain. The house wants your pain. And the house hates you. Okay, so introduction, again, a lot of words on the page, but in general, I guess I would describe the Darkest House as a haunted house. A haunted house that lives and crosses over many, maybe every world. And it's the house itself that's the villain, not the things that are in it. There is an origin and there's a story. The story isn't as crystal clear, or it's not, hey, if you do these things, then you absolutely figure out everything it is about the house. Some of what the house will become will really be what your players think and what you as the GM make it. There are some stories and some things will be that will come to fruition as you get into the house. But again, not everything is clear cut and crystal clear. But there are a number of themes that will appear as you get into the house, and it touches all worlds. One way or the other, the house exists in every world. I like some of what Monte Cook does as he describes the Darkest House, and he talks about realism in the Darkest House. That look, there are going to be things that just are completely outside the pale that may not make any sense. He talks a lot about paradoxes of time within the house and how, at your discretion as the GM, you can decide, do the players need to eat? Do they need to sleep? If they do sleep, there's some mechanics that come into play and some challenges, but it's a haunted house. Just think about it as such. And it's more about the tale and it's more about what you're describing than it is about, what about this role or this specific, mechanic or what have you. It's much more about the players, how they evolve in the house, and how you get to know more about their backstory and how their backstory evolves. And if there are sections of the house and there are themes of the house, and the sections are much more about the dark side of family and love, as he says. Not so much about how realistic is this, and wait a second, I thought I saw in one room of the house there was this aspect, but that totally changed somewhere else. It's true. There are a lot of dichotomies, a lot of absurdities, perhaps in the house, and I think just playing into those to me makes it fun. Crossing the threshold. So a lot of, I think what this is trying to get across is this theme that the house hates you. And of course, we mean the player characters. So as we get into the different pages of this document, you'll see a lot about how that building dread and tension. And there's something called a house die mechanic that we'll get into. And it's all about, how the house is trying to act. And it doesn't matter why, as it says here. And that, as he describes, that would only matter if there was a way to assuage that hate, but there isn't. So I think there's some really great descriptive text here, but it's a living, breathing thing, the house is. Yeah, so I'm trying to see if there's anything else in here. I mean, it does, in this case, what he's trying to get across is that the house is aware of you. It does have an interest in you, and it, in fact, hates you. So the mood of the darkest house, what is it? And I love the first sentence. It's a descent into madness. I think about, I apologize if I get the name wrong, but Into the Mouth of Madness, I think was the movie. But it's really, about descending into madness, its traumas, its scars. He talks a lot about his inspiration for the darkest house being The Shining, Clive Barker, a lot of, what I consider just classic horror references. And it's a lot about what you can't see. I mean, you do see things, there's tons of imagery, but a lot of this is about the dread. It's about what's coming around the corner versus just cheap gore and things like that. It's much more about that building crescendo. And what is it not? It's not just skulls and gore. It's, I like how he says it's not Stephen King. It's not Lovecraft. It's not action packed. It's more about the ghost story and the tales and, the stories that you make as you're within the house. And there are some journal pages, and there's someone that was one of the owners there, Philip Harlock. And you'll find a lot of handouts that bring some insight into him. But, even that, it's unclear, exactly, you might find some background, but you're not trying to save Philip. He's long gone. Or cleanse the house. I mean, it's way, way beyond that, as he would say. Online gaming, I mean, I think the real point of this is everything that he developed, this app and how he did this, it was during, or at least I think as he brought this to fruition, it was when COVID was in full bloom, so to speak. And I think a lot of what he did was to try to get this to play well on Zoom, on Roll20, on Discord, on any platform. As I said, Alchemy RPG, Roll VTT, Foundry. I mean, you could do this almost anywhere. And he's writing it at the tail end of 2020. There's a lot of art and conversational aspects of this that I think really lend it well to having cameras and just the imagery of the darkest house. So I think a very simplistic VTT in my mind. And now that there is the print, as I record this video, the book itself is out of print, but hopefully he'll do another printing because I love it. I'm reading it almost every night. I love to read the different parts of the room and go through it. Yeah, here's another. I think this entity is called the Creeper or the Lurker. I think it's the Creeper. There's a Creeper and a Lurker. I get them a little confused, but just this image of this creature coming directly out of the painting is amazing. All right. The house system. So again, I think this is somewhat polarizing, but the house system is really easy to use or really to understand, very different from what you're using. Again, whether it's 5e, whether it's Pathfinder, keep saying the same one, Shadow the Demon Lord, the things that I know well, but I know even like Cypher System, any game you can think about. But the house system does two principal things. It allows the players and the GM to focus on the story and the mood. So you're not going through all these mechanics and wait, how many of these spells are left? You can do some of that tracking, but it's very simple and allows you to build and tell that story. And secondly, again, it tells the players in a very, very clear way. Things are different in that. All languages are understood in the house. Doesn't matter what they are, anything. It just, the laws of physics just work differently in the house. Now, as he says, a lot of people say, I don't want to change. I want all the mechanics as they were. You can do that. you can, the nice thing about the conversion system is it works both ways. If you absolutely just can't get away from your 5e mechanics, you can keep them. And then there's some ways you could potentially convert the NPCs and the quote unquote monsters in the Darkest House into 5e. So you can do that, but he does recommend that if you do that, figure a way out to at least incorporate the house die, which we'll get into, and dooms, which is another big concept that we'll get into as we get further into this game. But dooms are things that are items that, because of some actions you took or occurred to you in the Darkest House, those have a lasting impact on your campaigns once you leave the house. So unfortunately for me, I don't have the time to do a lot of campaigns. So I tend to run everything as a one-shot. As much as I like that, and I've had success, I think, with the Darkest House in one-shots, it's very, very much, I could see this being so much more impactful if you're doing this in a campaign. There's some ways that maybe in another video I'll show you that I tried to incorporate those concepts of a campaign, getting to know the characters more, building a little more about the backstory. So I created a Google Sheet that had some information I wanted to make sure I knew about the characters before they went into the house, but I did this much more as a one-shot. So we'll get into dooms, but again, those are very lasting outside of the house. And everything has a rating. We'll talk about the mechanics of the house, but it's pretty simple. It's on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the simplest or the easiest, 10 being the hardest or the best. So he kind of has some examples in here. If you're thinking about a door and how strong a door might be, door inside your house might be kind of a 3, and a sturdy iron door might be an 8. But everything will have a rating, whether you're picking a lock, interacting with something, everything, and everything within the house will have a rating as well. See, he does say, again, all of this is in your control, which I feel like a lot of the good RPGs say that. Like, look, this is a framework, change what you want. I just kickstarted Shadow Dark, and Kelsey Dion made that a really big point to in her descriptive text as well, and I think that's absolutely right. So there will be target numbers that we'll go through that, again, make this a really simple system. But he does say that, look, some people will want to scale the house up and down. He recommends you don't. So like some tasks as your characters progress, and maybe they've come in and out of the house a few times, and now they're super powerful, and they're, I don't know, level 15, 18 in a 5e game. And his point is, when they come back in, when you scale those characters, they might have a much higher rating. So some tasks might be really simple. But his feeling is that that's okay. You come in the house, it should be easier. But if you want to change it, you certainly can, and you can scale those encounters and ratings up if you'd like. Converting the player characters. So what the big point here is, we're trying to get the essence of your character. Not every single item, every single spell, every ability. It's more about how do you make your character. So if I'm Gwydion and I'm a level 5 ranger in 5e, what makes Gwydion Gwydion? And there might be some really key things. Maybe it's Hunter's Mark and a few things that are really important. But it's just, you're trying to get the essence of that character. And so it's really rather than trying to create a formula to follow, it's more about the converting the character as a whole. So like he says, and like in 5e or Cypher, he has both of those examples here. But in 5e, you're kind of comparing a 5e character to everyone else in a 5e system. So if it's a scale of 1 to 10, his example here, if it's a 5th level half-orc fighter, it's probably about a 3. And he has some other examples here. He talks about Numenera Glaive, tier 2, and that might also be a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10. And his feeling, again, is that, he has serious doubts whether you could even really do a formulaic conversion to just every single system out here. So his intention, and again, this rubs some people the wrong way. I feel like I had some friends of mine that didn't back the Darkest House because they felt like it was, I can't do it easily, convert this isn't what I expected. But I get why he did this, and I think actually it makes a ton of sense. So let's get into characters. So the house system simplifies everything into a rating on a scale of 1 to 10. In most other games have some type of numerical rating. And it might be a 1 to 10, it might be 1 to 20. And if it's 1 to 20, real simple to say, hey, like if it's a 5e game, at least I believe that still goes up to 1 to 20. You can cut that in half. If somebody's level 10, maybe that's a 5 rating in the house. And there's also some charts to make it easier. So if you look at the house system on the left, 1 to 10, and you have other game systems that are common, like again, like a D&D in general might go 1 to 20. There's some that might have like that D100 system, so 1 to 100. So you can kind of take an average there. And if it's 31 to 40, maybe that's a 4 in the house system. So really what he says is the original system uses points to build the character, use the number of points they would need and compare it to the number of starting points and a maximum. So if a character starts with 150, he can go to 500. But the character that we're looking at was built at about 200, about 40% of 500. So maybe that's a rating of 3 or 4. Now he does say, no matter what system you're using, if you're not sure, round down. It's only a 10-point system is how I look at that. And I think in his general feeling is make it a little more challenging and round down is how I believe that. And he does say, as you're converting this, you're trying to make it in broad terms, bring this person over. So I'll go down to the bottom, rules of thumb. If the character is basically a real world human, the maximum rating is probably a 4. They're going to be less than average. If it's a superhero, then their minimum might be a 5. And if it's a heroic fantasy character, like a lot of us are used to with D&D and Pathfinder and what have you, it could be anywhere from 1 to 10. So it just, again, he says round down. Another important point, and we'll get into a little bit, I'll show you how he shows the character creation. But in general, you're going to come up with an overall rating. And then from there, you're going to tweak it up and down slightly. For the most part, he advocates going up or down like 1 rating. So his example here is a character might be rating 3, but they're really good. They're really stealthy. Maybe they're really rating 4 when they're sneaking. So if that ever comes up in the house, which it could, then they're a 4 as it relates to sneaking. And maybe you have a character who has strong mental powers, but it's really frail. So maybe he's a 5 rating, but only a 4 when it's physical activities. So just tweak it up and down, typically not more than 1 away from their main rating, but there might be other things that could give them a higher or lower rating. He says, what about stuff? You can bring in your sword. Sword's a sword. It's not going to come into play that much unless there's something like magical about the sword. And then maybe you're going to give it some additional, a higher rating or a boon, which we'll talk about in a bit. So he talks here about armor and defensive equipment. It can modify a character's defense rating or confer a boon to a defense roll, which I'll get into shortly. But in the case of a physical attack, maybe your character's a 3, but they'll get a +1 for light armor. Or if they're wearing like chainmail or something else, maybe it's a +2. So characters are level 3, and maybe they're a 5 for defense or resisting wounds. So another thing that he makes a really important point here is there's no contact with other areas outside the darkest house. So radios, things like that. There's a little bit of an exception he talks about. Actually, I guess that's getting out of the house, which I'm getting ahead of myself. But in general, you cannot contact anyone outside the house. What about special magic items, and abilities, and spells? And he does talk about, like, in general, things that just can work. Maybe you can turn invisible, and maybe you put a cap on that. You have an invisibility spell, but it just works. You turn invisible. And like he says, those things are more narrative than mechanical. Maybe there's some things that there's supernatural defense acting as like a mental armor. So if they're trying to avoid a mental attack, maybe the rating increases by 1 or maybe 2. And then finally, any ability that makes a task easier is a boon. So if you have a strength enhancing ring that allows you to try to tip over a heavy bookcase, so it gives you a little bit more oomph or chutzpah, I guess, as you're trying to do that, you get a boon on that action. I think we'll get into boons later, but if anybody's played Shadow of the Demon Lord, it's akin to that, But in most rolls in the house system, you're going to roll 2d6. So if you get a boon, you're going to roll 3d6 and drop the lowest dice. That's it. If you get a bane, you're going to roll 3d6 and drop the highest dice. So it helps, but it's not an over-the-top mechanic. And you can have boons and banes cancel each other out, but you can never have more than one boon or one bane. So if you got something that technically you have 3 boons and 1 bane, you have technically 2 boons, but that just means you roll with 1 boon, no matter what. So he does say if spells or special abilities have some limitation on use, like use 3 times a day, keep it. Nothing said, just keep it that way and have the players track that. And he does also say if they cost the user something from stamina or mental well-being, you can treat it as a wound, which we'll get into in a bit. So there is some adjudication to do here, but as he says, it's a narrative conversion, not really a mechanical one. What about hit points, attributes, all that? It's the house already tracks how you make attacks, how you suffer damage, and how you resolve tasks. So any mechanics dealing with hit points and all that, strength, you don't need to. You don't bring that over. A lot of things that you would normally think about. If something happens that's stats, you're going to get stat related, you're going to use the house system. Money, in general, you don't need it. It's irrelevant. All languages are understood in the house. Don't worry about that. This part I think is pretty important here. If the PCs are 1 or 2 rating, they should be prepared to be moving stealthily and run. Something I would recommend that you make sure players know that, think of an old school game. Running is not a bad option in many cases. If you're rating 3 to 6, and the players that I brought in, I put them at level 3. I wanted it to be challenging, but give them a chance. So rating 3 to 6, greatly challenged, but they have a chance to make it out alive. And 7 and higher, you could probably take on the house head on. So maybe you start introducing the house when they're at level 1 or 2, and then they make different forays into the house over time. Converting the characters back. So once you leave the house, you're going to want to convert them back. And most things that, there's only a handful of things that really are going to have changed. Wounds, so you might need to, convert those over, but it might just, like he says, just maybe after a week or so of rest, you recover from those wounds. But if they do have curses, dooms, things like that, they're probably going to be more narrative, but those should be meaningful and continue. And you can figure out how to do that in whatever system that is. Gear, maybe they've lost something. I found it pretty fascinating that he talks about how most of the magical treasures he has in the house are designed so there's not really a mechanical effect. They can work in any system. So his point is, in general, that it should work if they bring those with them outside. And if they gained experience, maybe you do have a significant advancements, and maybe that's level increase in 5e, level or 2, or some of the other systems, whatever that may be. Taking actions and rolling dice. So to resolve an action, you're always going to roll 2 6-sided dice, add the dice together, and then add whatever the rating is in that task. So if you're rating 4 in whatever that task is, 2d6 plus 4, and your target is always a 7, period. Now, he gives some examples here. So let's just say, we'll just take this example. The task is a rating 3. And so when you're rolling a task, it's always the target is 7 plus the rating of the task, because that makes it more challenging, right? So if the task is a rating of 3, the target number is 10. Pretty simple, right? 7 plus 3. And if the PC has a rating of 3, then you need to roll a 7 or higher on the 2d6 to succeed, right? Because basically it would be a 7, but you're going to add your 3 to it. So that makes it a 7. Because this is all just arithmetic, you could also just say, hey, I know my target's 7. If the task is a 3 and my rating is a 3, those two cancel each other out. I know I need a 7, period. Or if it's the task is a 4 and my rating is a 3, it makes it 1 step higher. We get 4 minus 3, 1 step higher. So I know that my target's going to be an 8. Just roll your dice. Pretty simple. And he does say if a task is rated 6 or more above a rating, it's impossible. And you go through the math, and if you go through all those statistical probabilities, if a task is the same level as you, then typically you're going to have a little over a 50% chance to succeed. Actually, I think it's 58. And you will have a chance to call upon the house die if there is something that you're going to fail, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Player always rolls. Super important. So again, as the GM, I know I'm used to rolling a lot, but no matter what. So if you're going to roll to attack, you're going to roll to complete a task, the player is, or if an NPC is attacking the player is going to roll to defend. So just have to think about that a bit. It just causes you as the GM to think just a little bit like if an NPC has a boon affecting their attack, then you got to think about it from the player standpoint. They're going to roll with a bane, right? So you're just going to have to convert a couple of those things, but pretty simple. When do you ask for a roll? When the outcome is in question, the action is significant. So I think a lot of good RPGs say this. You don't have to ask for a roll for everything. If it's something they're skilled in and it's simple, just let them succeed. But some of it's preference, right? But if it's something significant, you're going to want to ask them to roll. These are like optional, so I won't cover these too much, but if you want to spice something up and have a special success or a partial success, then there's some suggestions for that. All right, house die. So remember, the house sees everything and the house hates you. It resents any time your players succeed. So every time a player rolls the dice for an action, not for damage, but for action, they roll a house die. And if that house die, if you read this Secrets of the House cover to cover, the entire thing, there are a few inconsistencies. I've listened to Monte quite a bit and read enough that my belief and how I understand it is if the house die is higher than both of your dies, so if you roll 2 dice, one's a 4 and one's a 3, the house die, if it's a 5 or a 6, then the house acts. So it's got to be higher than either of your dice, both of them, not just one, but the highest of your 2 dice. That's how I interpret it. So there is an exception, though. If your character is really desperate and really wants to have an action succeed, you can call upon the house. And if you do that, then you can add that house die to your normal results. You can do that whenever you want, but when you do that, the house acts. It's bad, and the character gains a doom. And the doom always comes back to haunt them. If you can make it on a VTT or in-person game, if you can make the house die a different color, somehow designate it, that'd be good. So for Boons and Banes, again, I kind of went through that. Real simple, though. For a boon, you're going to roll an additional d6 and discard the lowest die. For a bane, you're going to roll additional d6 and discard the highest. So they can offset, but remember, you'll never have more than one boon or one bane. So how that works. Kind of went through this, but if the NPC has a boon or a bane, think about that. You're going to have to flip that as you think about how your character will roll. So dooms. When a character gains a doom, the GM should make a clear and obvious note of it so that you know what it is. And the feeling of danger should rise when you get a doom. And when a wounded character falls unconscious, then you have to roll to determine whether you die from your wound, and you have to subtract your doom total. So there is some real implications from having a doom. You can also lower your doom by spending a doom. In this case, you basically give your GM the permission to do something bad. A horrible vision that causes a metal room, an attack by a ghost, loss of a piece of equipment, something. But you're going to get that inflicted on you by the GM. So if you leave the house with dooms, they're going to have some lasting effects. Maybe terrible nightmares, lingering haunting, some physical malady that is going to cause you challenges. But the point is the things that happen in the house can have a lasting impact on you. So in general, you're going to act in turns when it matters. The characters usually perform actions first. One action, make an attack, move 30 feet, anything that can be done in about 10 seconds. The way I've played it, it didn't come to play that much, but kind of like 5e, I let people, hey, you can move and attack. It's basically as simple as that. We talked about the rating and the house die, so I won't go through this again, but he does keep repeating how those mechanics works. All right, so let's talk a bit about a character conversion. So he starts with a cipher system character, and his example is Tasha, a swift explorer who works miracles. So I guess I'm not familiar with the system, but he says that, basically she's swift, she's capable, and she can miraculously heal people. She's a tier 2 out of 6. So right off the bat, what he says is, look at column 1 to 6 of the character rating conversion table, and a tier 2 would in general be a rating 2 or 3. So again, remember, in general, you would make it lower, the lower of the two. So a 2. So he says that, look, her might and intellect pools are mostly normal, so she's going to ignore those. She's swift, so it gives her better initiative and running abilities. So we'll give her a rating 3 for anything to do with speed. As an explorer, she's trained in swimming and climbing, so maybe she has a little bit higher rating there, a 3 as well. She's skilled in geography, but that doesn't really come into play in the Darkest House. You can see the simplicity of the character sheet, overall 2 rating, higher in speed and climbing, give her 3. She has some special defense and offensive abilities, which make her better at combat. So he says, rather than try to adjudicate all those and put them all on her character sheet, just say she's a rating 3 for attack and defense. She wears light armor, and not every system does this, but I think of it as your defense is, resisting that attack or not being hit by that attack in general. So she wears light armor, so you're going to give her a rating 3 for resisting damage. So you have kind of a defense rating and then a resisting defense. And he says healing people. He says, maybe how you do that is she can use her action to try to get rid of her wound. This came into play for me, and it is interesting mechanic. You can do this how you want, but in his case, he says, make a roll using her rating and the rating of the wound. So you'd make a roll to get that wound off of you. And this kind of threw my 5e player. She's like, wait, my healing doesn't just work? And I should have described that better, but I think to me, it's like, look, it works. But whether or not, that is outside of your skill set is a different story. So, I think, you have, I think that's a good, simple way to say, yeah. Or maybe you say, hey, if the wound is lower than her rating, she just succeeds. That's another way you could do it. Got a couple of other equipment items that you could put on her character, but that's it. She's done. You can get rid of one wound or condition per wound once, or she can try to once per action is what he says. Another example or two, dwarf fighter, same kind of thing. This is a level 5 in a 5e game. That's our baseline. Got a really high con, so you're not going to bring over his attribute, but he's tough, so we'll give him a 4 for resisting wounds. Low dexterity and charisma, so he's a 2. So in this case, started with a 3, went up a level to give him a 4 for resisting wound, and down for dexterity and charisma. In addition to his high con, he's got plate armor, which in this case, probably one of the few exceptions. He's saying it'll add 2 more to his rating, and that gives him maybe a 6 for resisting wound. So super high. Overall rating 3, but we're going to bump that up to 6 because of his plate armor, and his con is so high. Got some ability to give him a bonus to armor class, combat maneuvers, so they're just going to lump those together for attacks and defense. So they're going to give him a 4 for attack and defense. And resisting wounds is where all those other bonuses came into effect. Got a shield in his warhammer that are magical. So in this case, he says, look, let's just say he gets a boon when the player rolls for attacks and defense. Instead of bumping up the rating, we're just going to give him a boon. So he's going to roll an extra d6. And that's it. Done. I won't go through the next one. You get the idea. Pretty simple. 2 ways to get hurt. You're going to track physical and mental. They both, there's no real difference in them other than you're keeping, as I understand it, 2 separate pools. Calculating a damage, you're always going to roll a 1d6. And that's called the damage die. You're going to add the attack's rating to the result, and you subtract the rating of the victim with modifications like armor or what have you. If it's a positive number, they suffer a wound. If the result is 0 or less, it's a scratch. It just didn't have any effect. You never roll the house die when rolling, but you can have a boon or a bane. So remember, players always roll the die. And so that they're always the ones that are bringing on their own downfall. Physical damage are some examples of how you might have damage. And again, the player rolls the die and adds the attack rating and subtracts your own rating. Character's rating is the dominant factor in the accuracy and damage in combat. Sometimes, again, you might have a boon or a bane because of the equipment. There's some more hacking thoughts in here, but yeah, you can read this at your leisure. Mental damage, again, is more about inflicting, shock, blast of psychic energy, or what have you. Some other examples of rating. Accumulating damage. A wounded character always has a bane for every wound sustained. But remember, they don't stack. It just might mean if you have several wounds, you're going to do most things with a bane. So they're going to have to keep track of those. Every time you're wounded, they must roll against the rating of their highest level wound. And if you fail, you fall unconscious or unable to act. And there's more mechanics. An unconscious character with a wound rated higher than the character must roll against the wound to see whether or not they bleed out and die. So there's some pretty, it's a pretty scary if you fall unconscious and you have a wound that's at or above your level. If they get any healing or something that happens before that happens, then they won't die. And there are ways, I think it says it in here somewhere, but normally I think after a minute or so for every wound, and I think this happens once a day, we'll have to look for this. But you can roll to see if you can take off that wound. I'll have to see if I can find that. Normally the house mentally attacks anyone who sleeps or is unconscious, but if you're unconscious due to wounds, we're not going to pile on and cause that. If an NPC ever suffers wounds, basically, once the total wounds reach 3 times the NPC's rating, they're slain. So an NPC is rated 4, they need wounds with ratings of 12 or above to kill them. And there is like an immediate kill mechanic. If you ever suffers a wound with a rating that is 3 or more higher than their rating, they're immediately dead. Healing, hurt characters should rest. When a character takes no action, sits or lies down, that's considered resting. There's not a limit on how much you can rest. And when you rest, you roll for each wound you currently bear with the rating of each task equal to that rating of that particular wound. You can roll for each one. You succeed, you recover from the wound. Now you can ignore it. Failure remains, and you can't try to recover from that wound again by resting until 24 hours. So you'll have to note if you fail to recover for a wound, and then in general, the GM will have to say when it's 24 hours. Medical attention, some sort of skill like bandages allows a wounded character to attempt to recover from a wound that they failed to heal without having to wait 24 hours. So you can kind of adjudicate that as you'd like. That's not how it worked before. The GM's going to have to adjudicate and handle things on a case-by-case basis. So to summarize, attacking and damage. When a player makes an attack, roll 2d6, add their rating. Their goal is 7 or higher. Boons and Banes for an extra die. If the player is successful, then if successful, the player rolls the damage die and adds their rating and subtract their opponent's rating. NPC attacking, basically you're going to be doing everything defensively. Example of attacking, I feel like this is already going to be going onto a really long video, but this shows the example of attacking, so it'll walk through all that in detail for you and give you some examples. So the truth we bring with us, you want to bring characters in with backstories and really much more than at least I typically play with. I'm not always great of a big backstory, but everyone brings a truth or a lie with them, which whether or not they realize this at first. But you need the truth or lie. It's fundamental to their being. And I put this into a Google sheet and ask my players to fill this out. But ideally, what you're wanting to make sure the character is truth or lie is it answers one of the following questions. What's the key to success? How important are my friends? What's my ultimate goal? What's my important principle or value? But you want to know that before they enter the house. And the other thing that's important is that a truth is something the character believes is true and the player does as well. A lie is something the character believes is true, but the player doesn't. So there's, again, you want to get that information on each of your players. There's character arcs in the house. No one's coming out unchanged. So there's kind of overall 5 types of arc: positive change, flat, the character knows the truth, faith is in the truth is tested, and they hang on to the truth. But basically, you're going to want to find ways to test your character in the house. So if a wizard's character truth is that their magic will always get them out of jam, it's worth trying to test that in the house. And this is something, I tried to do this with my players, but what they talk about is we're trying to shine a spotlight on the characters and test their truths and lies. So what we say here is, when possible, if there's only one character affected by something in a given room, don't choose randomly. Choose the person that makes the most sense. So if you have a character whose truth involves their faith in their friends, and you're in this room, I guess, called the studio, have a different character potentially fall victim to the duplicate. That way it's bad not only for the affected character, but those who had faith in the affected character. So there's a room where one of the characters might fall prey and become a duplicate. So just think about the rooms and what's happening and which character would make more sense. Let's see. Yeah, this kind of tells about like how many arcs do you want to have before you ultimately get them out of the house. This is, I think, if you're going to be in the house and be in there for the entirety of maybe it is a campaign in the house, but to me, you might come in and out of the house. The nature of the house, it's sometimes it's called the house that hungers, and it absorbs rooms. So sometimes, this is a really cool aspect. You might have a room from one of your campaigns seep into the house. The story of the house, there's a lot of talk about Philip Hartlock, which is one of the owners, but it's unclear. It's unclear exactly what all has happened within the house. You'll find some aspects of the house. It's a haunted house. There's certainly some family trauma. There's Philip Hartlock's story. So if you're in the house for a long time, you might find out that Philip was one of the first owners. He grew up in the house. There were owners before him. There's a lot of things that you might find out about Philip as you get into the house. And there's entities that represent the dark aspects of family members in the house. So you'll hear, as you look at the application, you'll hear pater, mater, frater, soror, and amator. So father, mother, brother, sister, and lover. And each of those rooms have a theme around it, or each of those sections of the house, which is really cool. Why not just fill out the background of the house? And that's, I love how he's answered some of these questions. And he does say that, look, it's not perfectly laid out. Did the house make Philip go insane? Philip make the house go insane? Are all the entities of the house and some of the characters in it, are they just aspects of Philip's mind? We don't know. And what he says is the answers to these questions aren't going to help me run the house. It might make it worse, or you or I as a GM. Because as you read through, a story is going to emerge, and maybe multiple. And as the characters explore, it's going to be multiple aspects or stories will evolve. Reasons to enter a house, whole host of reasons. No reason to dwell on that. Stories that you're gonna get into as you get into the house. There's ways to craft tools to get out of the house. Let's see. Researching the house, it talks about some industrious characters. If they want to research before, you might find some information, some rumors, true and false. Conditions in the house. There's magic inside. That might be interesting for those that don't have magic in their campaigns. There are anachronisms. There's some things that just might not make sense. And there's telephones, there's radios. That might not make any sense. So think about how to describe those if you're coming from a fantasy setting. Time gets strange inside. Essentially, time works how you want it to. If you want to pay attention to it, then pay attention to it. If you don't. Just, same thing for sleep. Just determine how you want to play that in the house. And the main reason you'll need to track is for the passage of time. So like he says, you can just on occasion say, oh yeah, you can check now for your wounds. Abilities in the house, most are going to function the way that they had intended. But some things you might have a little twist on them. You're not trying to frustrate the players, but showcase that things work a little different in the house. So, and no contact with the outside world. So no magical communication, nothing outside. But if you do try to contact something, then you're going to contact the house, and that's bad. There's various things that could happen. You could become possessed, direct mental feedback, damage, like basically a mental attack, or deception. You think you're contacting your relative, but it's really the house. No easy way to get out of the house. There's a handful of ways, but no easy way. And sleeping in the house, you get attacked. Damaging the house, for the most part, it heals. If you leave and come back, there's a few things that if you destroy, never get returned, but in general, it'll come back. Running games in the Darkest House, I mean, he talks a bit about you're going to show players the illustrations, the maps, how to run the games, player safety and consent. Make sure that you're really going over some of the overt descriptions, violence, body horror, mental illness, and there are some other suggestive themes too. And again, there's different aspects or ways you'd want to get people as a one shot, and that's what I do. But he's right, man. If you can do this as a campaign, it's much better. A lot more about storytelling than mechanics, right? We talked about that. The mechanics are pretty simple. It is challenging, as you can see. We've gone through a lengthy period already. I think I've been talking for almost an hour. So there's a lot to this. But be upfront with the kind of scenario and mood that you want to evoke. And if they're struggling, talk to the characters between sessions and try to get them interested in it. Players resisting the character building. Yeah, this is really about character building, and encourage them to get into it. Stories are going to emerge, and try to convert things the way you think your characters will understand and will live with. Challenges for online playing. I think we've all gotten to know that, but allow for more time, shorter sessions, those types of things. Read aloud. Have your players read the remnants, which are the handouts. Manage the screen real estate. Use a lot of direct messaging. Hey, use lighting. Dim your lights. Turn off cameras if you can. Do things to isolate players. Mess around with the cameras and microphone. Whisper. A lot of VTTs allow you to whisper. Vary your voice. Get really close to the mic. Get farther away without them really knowing what you're doing. There's all kinds of things you can do. When the house acts, it's typically in a progressive order. So you'll go through these in order, but try to vary how you describe it. But ultimately, it will be one of the characters or one of the big entities, father, mother, that are going to show up. Sections of the house. So again, pater, mater, soror, frater, and amator. There are different sections, but you don't need to. There's a flow chart that I'll go through in another video. Pater section is cruel, domineering, and discordant. Mater is cloying, smothering, and emotional. Soror is sly, deceptive, vindictive. Frater, jealous, angry, and violent. And amator is mysterious, withholding, and untrustworthy. You can also get to the original part of the house. Rooms, there's all kinds of rooms and different styles. The house it's very confusing layout. It's very disorienting, which is good. Rooms do reset. There's not a set time. Room descriptions, you'll see that there's a lot of great information in the app. There's a lot of good flow charts that will help you walk through them. There's a few entrances. The front door, most people show up in the living room. There's a back door that they can possibly come in over the wall. And you could use a devoured room, so something that has come over from another campaign. Escaping the house, there's a few ways, 6 ways. In general, like you can't get out from a teleport spell, but maybe a wish spell, something that's super powerful. Finding the doorman, completing a character art, building the mystic door. There's a number of ways, but again, if you escape, most often, it's going to come back, or you're going to have a doom long-term implications. So, I know that was super long. I think I'm going to cut this here. Maybe next time go through the app. But I hope that gives you a feel for what the Darkest House is about, and if it's interesting for you to run in your campaign. Quickly, I'll show you. You can get the Darkest House on Drivethru RPG. So it's $44.99. You can also go to Monte Cook Games and get it there, and there's more of a description. Right now, the Darkest House is out of print, but again, you can get it for Mac and Windows. So I hope you enjoyed this, and again, longer video, a little different from what I normally do. But yeah, I will put up some links to some playthroughs of the house, including mine and others, some walkthroughs that Monte Cook did, and hopefully more information that will be useful to you. So I hope to see you all around on various forums. There's a Cypher forum that's great, that has a lot of discussion on the Darkest House. But until next time, if you like this, please give me a like and give me a comment on anything else you'd like to see regarding the Darkest House. See you next time.